Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. By now, I think we've all seen the video or at least heard about the heinous murder of Robert Brooks. I'm a man who's rarely at a loss for words, but it's damn near impossible to express how furious it makes me. You got this white lynch mob who murders this black man in cold blood, and they were so emboldened to carry out their crime they didn't even bother to take off their body cameras. But then again, why should they? They carried out their satanic crime with all the confidence of a racist mob who knew that their white privilege immunizes them against any threat of prosecution. And they're right. Just look at the way that Letitia James, the so-called Attorney General of New York, decided that she was going to describe the beating, death, and murder of Robert Brooks. Following an encounter, as if he was pulled over on the side of the road or something, and then using the phrase use of force. Preliminary facts subject to change. This was coming from the Attorney General's office in this case. They started downplaying this murder from the jump. Look at the date on here. Just a few days after the murder. And this is the first statement they put out. Following an encounter. Use of force. Preliminary facts subject to change. Gee, did the police or correction officers union write this? Because that's what it reads like. At no point does she acknowledge what was done to Mr. Brooks. No mention of the word beating or assault or kick to death or mention his spinal injury or anything else. Instead, she chooses the phrase use of force. This murder was committed over 3 weeks ago. There's absolutely no question what they did, and yet the governor of the state is just now going to visit the scene of the crime. And the black female Attorney General of New York is still dithering about. She's calling this a use of force incident. And she's not alone. The white media is also using that phrase. They're on code, as if they hadn't seen the video either. That's deliberate. Their goal is not merely to minimize this murder, but to justify it. That's the point they're trying to get to. They're trying to say, oh, well, you just think that this was a heinous murder. Well, I'm sure they didn't know what they were doing. Training! They need to be retrained. I was waiting to see if anybody would use that phrase. So far, I haven't seen it, but I'm sure that they're just waiting for the right time to go ahead and slip that in. This is a training issue, you see. They need better training. Yeah, they can't use that lie in this case, but they're trying to see if there's a time they can get an opening to do so. When you add the lying words use of force, that's meant to tell people that the victim, who was handcuffed and just sitting there, by the way, being beaten to death, well, they had to beat him to death. They needed to use force. This was a use of force issue here. I mean, he was the one who brought it about. He was the one responsible for it. They had to use force. Okay, they went a little bit too far, but he was the one who justified the use of force in the first place. That's the point they're trying to reach. And by they, I mean the white media and Letitia James. She's neck deep in trying to justify this murder. Look at the phrasing, following an encounter. This statement is like the one the white racists would give back in the day after they hanged a black person and say, well, this Negro died at the hands of persons unknown. Following an encounter, as if they don't know who did it. Now, of course, the murderers in this case have not been arrested. These guys are on leave, most likely paid leave, because that's what they do whenever these murderers kill a black person. You want to make sure that they understand, hey, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that no charges are brought against you. We're going to wait and see if there's a public outcry. If there is, well, that might be a problem. But in the meanwhile, we're going to see if we can wait this one out. Don't worry, we're on your side. Just give it a little while and we'll go ahead and see about having you transferred if we have to. Or if we can get this issue to go ahead and die a natural death, the media loses interest because the public is not on their butts about it, then we can just go ahead and slip you back in there. It wouldn't be the first time. One of the murderers, Nicholas Anzalone, is also named in a separate federal complaint from 2022 stating that he joined in an assault on an inmate by another corrections officer at the same facility. Just keep in mind that case, or rather investigation, is still ongoing. And then two of the other murderers, Glenn Trombley and Anthony Farina, were also accused of having been witnesses to the beating of an inmate in 2020 at the same prison where they murdered Brooks. See, in that other instance, the claim is that Trombley and Farina were mere onlookers. They didn't actually take part in beating this other guy so severely that he was facially deformed, and he was also handcuffed as well. We have an MO here. This is how these criminals carry out their crimes. Now, in the case of Robert Brooks, they weren't bystanders at all. Nobody can sit there and claim, well, they just failed to render aid or to intervene. It was a failure to intervene. No, in this case, they were active participants in beating that man to death. So we have 2 incidents from 2022 and before that from 2020. And yet these animals are still in the same positions that they held 4 years ago. Nothing was done about them after 4 years. Does anyone know who the Attorney General of New York was back in 2020 when this first violent attack was carried out by these thugs? Oh, that's right, Letitia James. She was the Attorney General 4 years ago, and she's still the Attorney General of New York today. About the only thing that was done were some do-nothing investigations by Merrick Garland's Injustice Department. Yeah, the feds were looking into it, but what have they done in the last 4 years? It doesn't take 4 years to bring charges. If he was black, you better believe if these guys were black, the charges would have been brought immediately. Just go ahead and ask R. Kelly and P. Diddy if you doubt that one. Wouldn't have taken 4 years to bring charges if they were black. But investigating this is better than what Letitia James has done. In her case, she hasn't done anything about it. In fact, all she's done is put out a statement that justifies this murder. Well, as we know from her track record, basically the only hate crimes she's interested in are ones that involve Asians or ones that don't involve black people at all. Robert Brooks has become another example of the black misleadership class's treason and why it is that we require an anti-black hate crime law. That is an absolute requisite. See, when Kamala Harris was out there on the campaign trail being asked, what about a black hate crime law, one to protect black people? And she won't even speak on the issue. She won't even talk about it as far as she's concerned. Don't even ask me about it. I'd like to know where the Kamala Harris bots are at now. Because when black people are out here saying she shouldn't get our vote unless she pledges that she's going to make sure that an anti-black hate crime law becomes the law of the land, that's going to be something she pushes for, she'll mention it at her State of the Union address. If she's not out there pushing for things to protect black people, why the hell should we be making sure that she becomes president? I'd like to know where all these DNC shills, all of these online bots and scumbags, where are they at now? I'd like for them to go ahead and tell us how an anti-black hate crime law isn't really that pressing an issue. It's not really that important. Robert Brooks was lynched in that prison. That's what that video you saw was. That's what a lynching is, an extrajudicial killing. That's what happened there, and the white powers that be, using their bootlicking mammy Letitia James, are trying to protect these murderers. That's what's going on here. But they can't. This isn't a case of, well, we don't know what happened here, or the Fox News favorite lie. We're waiting for all the facts to come out. No, they already got all the facts. And by the way, Fox News only drags out that lie whenever there's no video. Whenever there's no video, then Fox News goes, oh, we got an opening, we think. There's not damning evidence. So, well, we got to wait for all the facts to come out. We can't have a rush to judgment. But whenever there's video, police do a dangerous job all the time. Yeah, murdering unarmed people, handcuffing somebody and beating them to death, very dangerous work. I mean, if somebody's not here violating people's civil rights and murdering people heinously, who's going to do it? The criminals? That's the reason that these guys are being quiet right now. That's what they always do. Even the Correction Officers Union, who never saw an incident of racist violence that they didn't like, they've been forced to have to shut their mouths and try to distance themselves on this one. They should be held accountable too, because all the times that they justify the murders that their union members carry out, they contributed to the exact same kind of social and legal climate that brought this about. They've been cheerleaders for every single murder that these racists have carried out, so they need to be accountable too. Treat them like any other terrorist organization. Label them as one and treat them as one. These animals should have been arrested the very day of the murder. Certainly as soon as the video came to light. And if they were black, they would have been charged immediately, but they weren't black. And that's why we see the white media and these politicians all circling the wagons and twisting their forked tongues in knots, trying to minimize this murder and even justify it. Letitia James has had all the smoke in the world for everyone else, but for black people, she's lying low. You can't even get a press conference out of the heifer. These bootlicking sellouts, they know what their job is under white supremacy, and that is to protect white supremacy and the anti-black violence that white supremacy uses. Now, a question for these DNC shills and idiots who have been spending the last month or so claiming that why are you guys sitting here not mad that Trump won? Why are you glad that Kamala Harris lost? You ought to be backing the Democrats. If the Republicans were in power, they'd be killing black folks in the streets. Letitia James, when she won office, she claimed that her election was some sort of accomplishment for black people, particularly for black women. She's trying to use herself as an avatar for black women. And yet when black women are killed in her state, she ain't got nothing to say about it. She has the same hands-off policy with the white supremacists that we've always seen before. Trash like Letitia James are not controlled opposition, they're just straight collaborators. Oh yeah, when it came time to talk about R. Kelly, then all of a sudden Letitia James was like, oh, we gotta have an investigation, and if there are any witnesses, please come forward. But when it comes time to talk about the murder of Robert Brooks, she's not saying, well, if there's anybody who has any accusations against these killers other than Robert Brooks' family, if there's anyone who has to bring any accusations at all, anybody who wants to make any accusations, please contact my office. She's not appealing to the public for more accusers to come forward on this one. But then again, whenever a black person's murdered, she has no problem laying low and go, well, we got to let the system play out. We can't put our thumb on the scales. Yeah, when it's a black person who's murdered, then all of a sudden she's not jumping her happy behind in front of the cameras and saying, will anybody please come forward and help us build a case? We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready. And always carry your steel. Power tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. We had all these people who told us that we need to vote Democrat no matter what. Vote blue no matter who. Vote Democrat down ballot. Well, if you're not going to vote for Kamala Harris, at least vote for the Democrats on the rest of the ballot. Yeah, people like Letitia James. Why, if he get back in the White House, these white supremacists gonna be killing black folk left, right, and center. You heard what Trump said. He said the cops need to be unrestrained. You heard what they said. Trump is gonna have people getting us killed all day. Well, virtually all the murders of black people by law enforcement have happened at the local and state levels, not the federal level. So Trump being in the White House doesn't mean anything any more than Biden being there meant anything. At most, all the orange man can do is signal to these racist thugs at the state and local level that his DOJ won't prosecute them. But then again, when you look at what's happened under Kamala Harris and Biden, you see that Merrick Garland has also had a hands-off policy when it comes to prosecuting police for harming or murdering black people. Look what I just got through showing you. 3 of the murders of Robert Brooks, they are under federal investigation. They've been under investigation for years by Merrick Garland's DOJ. And the Biden administration hasn't brought any charges, hasn't actually done anything to them. They're still in the same positions that they held before Merrick Garland began, quote-unquote, investigating them. So it seems to me as if the only thing you would have with Trump is an honest racist in the Justice Department saying we're not going to do anything about it, as opposed to Merrick Garland, who won't return your phone calls but still doesn't do anything about these killers. So I ask the same question that I've been asking since 2016 for all these DNC shills. Will one of you please tell me what horrible, unspeakable things that you're terrified are going to happen under Trump that isn't already happening right now? Name for me the horrible things that Trump is going to do that isn't going on right now. I have yet to find anyone who can answer that question. And that's because they already know the answer. So why do they keep running around acting like it would be different? Because these are liars. Many of them who are pathetically hoping they can get a job from some Democrat politician. That's what these shills and plants and bootlicks and tethers and other assorted professional white supremacist butt kissers are trying to do. They're trying to climb the social ladder literally over black people's dead bodies. And they're shameless about it. I would really love to see the morons and the mouth-breathing idiots who are telling me that Trump would unleash a flood of anti-black violence by the police against us. I'd love to hear them speak up now, because times like this, when it's actually time to look at anti-black violence, we never see them. When the violence goes down, they're always in hiding. But the rest of the time, then they stick their heads up and go, you better vote Democrat. It's the only way you're going to be safe. When have we ever been safe from anti-black violence in this country? Who has ever kept us safe from anti-black violence? All the voting that black people do, consistently voting, making sure that we're always voting in solidarity, and yet the situation goes on unabated. Gee, I'm starting to think that maybe voting for these Democrats ain't the answer, any more than voting for the Republicans is. This is how white power gets you to sit on your hands while they carry out their barbarity. At least in 2020, people actually took to the streets and raised hell. What do we see happening in New York? A couple of lukewarm demonstrations, most of which barely make the news. Because there's an allegedly black attorney general who's in office there, so there's no need for the public to worry, right? I mean, she's going to investigate, just like Merrick Garland has been investigating these murders, these very same murders been under investigation ever since Merrick Garland took office. Ever since he's been attorney general, they've been investigating and investigating and investigating, but they never get to the point of prosecuting. They never get to that part. Just like when you had Ahmaud Arbery who was murdered. It was Merrick Garland's DOJ doing everything that they could to say, well, let's go ahead and make a plea deal. I mean, we kind of had to go after these guys so we could appear to be doing something, but that was just for PR. We did that just for the cameras. Now let's just go ahead and dismiss this thing and get rid of it. And they sat there in court and said that the family of Ahmaud Arbery would best be served by giving a weak little sweetheart plea deal to his murderers. That's how brazen these bastards under the Biden administration are. How is this different than what you would get from a Trump administration? Answer, it's not. All of this refusing to arrest the killers, refusing to comment on their murder, and taking week after week after week to do nothing, that's all meant to reassure these race soldiers that the system has their backs. That's what this is about. These are Democrats sitting here leading the charge to push back against the changes that black people have forced on the system in the last 5 years. Everything that can be done to reassure these race soldiers that the system has their backs, that's what they're doing. And it's an allegedly black prosecutor who's bending over backwards to do it. She refuses to even call the beating death of Robert Brooks a beating. She won't even call it that. What the hell would she say was going on that video? Use of force. It's use of force. To James and her white paymasters, the crisis here for them isn't a public safety crisis. The real crisis is that they're going to be forced to prosecute these white assailants for murdering a black person. That's the crisis that they're trying to avoid. That's what they're scared of. Last week I told you that anytime some anti-black racist tries to claim that New York is so liberal just because black people are getting lynched there and murdered there and their families threatened, like the family of John White, well, New York is so liberal. And yet whenever it comes to these white assailants who kill black people, they never get charged. It's the black people, on the other hand, who get railroaded into prison. Yeah, you got yourself a little racial double standard there, which is the entire point. But anytime some clown calls themselves saying that New York is so liberal, so if there's a white person who's acquitted for murdering a black person, well, this is in liberal New York, so that's how you know that clearly it was justified. I mean, this is liberal New York, they're so liberal. You make sure you remind them of the decades-long history of anti-black violence in New York. From Bernie Goetz to Daniel Penny, and now you can add the murder of Robert Brooks to that shameful list. See, that's a game that these white supremacists like to play, if you let them. New York is not liberal at all. It's as right-wing and conservative as any red state. When you hear these clowns talking about New York or California being so liberal, what they're talking about is some meaningless issue having to do either with the environment or gay marriage or something. Certainly nothing when it has anything to do with black people. But of course, times like this, those same individuals who were defending Daniel Penny, they're quiet all of a sudden. So apparently, as far as they're concerned, they'll defend a murder if they think they can get away with it. And what Letitia James is attempting to do is to grease the skids for exactly that. The goal is to tiptoe to, well, this was just a use of force that got out of control. That's the point they're trying to reach. That's where they're trying to get to. And you will see Letitia James sitting here dissembling before it's all over and saying, well, we were investigating and we were very concerned. And, well, you know, we think that some more training is in order and this is a disciplinary issue. And we're not sure if it's murder. It's probably just, at most, it might be homicide, but we're not sure about that. You know, maybe misdemeanor or something like that. That's the point they're trying to reach, because this is all about laying the groundwork for pushing back against the changes that black people have forced on the system. And predictably, they have a black bootlick who's out here being the face of inaction in the face of white supremacist aggression. That's the entire point. Oh, we got this black woman here, but she's not going to do anything. She knows what side her bread's buttered on. So before it's all over, you better believe Letitia James is going to do some stupid little know-nothing press conference where she'll try to pretend as if we're very concerned and we're going to come down hard on these guys, but it's going to be the usual Democrat nothing burger. And of course, the white media will bring on their so-called experts, who are nothing more than sock puppets pushing the white media line, and they will predictably say, well, this is reasonable, you know, just because they're on video beating this man to death and they've got prior investigations against them for doing the same thing against other inmates, well, that's no reason to believe you could get a conviction. I mean, you never know what a jury might do. A lie that the white media only says whenever there's some crime that they agree with. Well, it's going to be up to black people to make it very clear that Democrats have lost black support, and it's precisely treasonous garbage like Letitia James who are the reason why. These are people who are trying to normalize murdering black people, and they'll be starting off by doing it in prisons first. This is a way to try to get people acclimated to, well, this happened behind bars, and behind bars, people don't exactly have ready access to these prisons. And then before it's all over, they're going to be saying, well, just because a black person was beaten to death by the police on camera, well, I mean, there's really not much we can do. This is about trying to tiptoe and now at this point trot their way back to the old normal. That's what they're attempting to do. Democrats working hand in hand with the same kind of violent anti-black racism that you get from the white right, both of them on code against us. Now, I'm sure that the family of Robert Brooks is planning some sort of civil action against the prison and against the murderers, I would hope, and I wouldn't be surprised if Mushmouth Crump is already there with bells on. But any sort of legal action against these individuals also needs to result in legal action against Letitia James. She's known about this mess and hasn't done anything about it. At some point, that's supposed to be called prosecutorial misconduct. That's certainly somebody who's refusing to do the basics of her job. Well, actually, her job as the law says it's supposed to be. But we all know that under white supremacy, there's the laws, and then there's white supremacy's rules. And it's excruciatingly obvious which ones the Letitia James of the world serve. This is the reason why I've told you that simply dropping the hammer on the thugs with badges isn't enough. The prosecutors and these judges are also going to have to be brought to heel. The pressure will also have to be applied on them as well. Unless we do that, we're going to have them acting as rear guard to try to protect these guys and justify the murders that their little race soldiers carry out. Consequences have to attach to the Letitia James and others who are covering for and minimizing and repeating lies to justify the murders of black people. There have to be means to make sure that these individuals face punishment for it. There have to be penalties for the individuals who carry out anti-black racism and for those in administrative positions who call themselves acting as some sort of support staff for them, protecting their murders and crimes, justifying their murders and crimes. Put them on notice that we're not drawing any distinctions between these race soldiers who carry out the murders and the Letitia James and others who try to protect them and to cover up for them. Because while the Letitia Jameses will try to take weeks and weeks to see if they can wait this storm out, we have to show them that this storm's not going anywhere, and it's one that's not going to leave any of these bootlicks standing. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Shabazz Navarra, Sherman Marshall, Eric Bailey, R. Laz, and Dean Ballantyne. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.